This is our last of the July series of Summer Sundays, which has the worship theme Sacred Earth. And next Sunday, I will lead us into our August worship theme of relationship, with a bit of a transition, looking at the life of trees and relationships among trees as for some inspiration there. And then our parish minister, Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, will lead through the rest of August Summer Sundays. So it's good to be together, and I'm glad to see you all here. How many of you know the children's story, The Lorax, by Dr. Seuss? Almost everybody? Maybe not everybody. If you haven't read it, please go out and read it. Here's a short summary. It is a cautionary tale. It opens in a land that is gray and forsaken. There are tree stumps littering the countryside, and smog fills the skies. We learn that long ago, this was a beautiful land full of trees, but that the Wandsler destroyed it. He chopped down all the trees to produce needs, right? Which everyone needs, despite the warnings of the Lorax, who speaks for the trees. So the animals have no place to play, the fish have no place to swim, and the birds have no place to fly, with all the smoke in the sky. And the Wandsler tells a boy in the future at this time, in this gray, dismal scene, a boy comes and approaches him to ask what happened. And the Wandsler says, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not." And with that, he throws down to the boy a seed, which is the very last truffle seed. It's a powerful children's book about what our modern society is doing to the earth right now. And unfortunately, it has a lot of truth to it. Also, unfortunately, it doesn't have all the answers to what to do, although it's a good start. Today, I'd like to recap some of the ideas I've shared 2 and 3 weeks ago in my reflections on the subject of sacred earth, and then build on those ideas to point a little further in the direction in which I think we can find an answer together, not that we have an answer now, of how not to destroy this planet. How can we shift away from the direction of environmental degradation, that direction which most of the story goes in the Lorax, although it ends with a hopeful note, I think. Like the story, our manufacturing and consumer-driven economy is destroying the planet and ourselves in the process. But unfortunately, what we don't hear in the story of the Lorax is that it's actually really hard to avoid being part of this economic machine that's destroying the world. He points to it in the story. What we also don't hear in the story is that to shift our society to become truly what I would call a life-sustaining society, a life-sustaining species on this planet will require collective will and action, not just the actions of one heroic individual, although that's a good start. The way I see it, we need to change our actions as a collective, but this can only be done by truly facing and moving through our feelings and through a basic reorientation of our worldview on a very deep level towards life. Thus, to deal with the enormity of this situation, we need to make a shift on 3 levels: our worldview, we'll say, our feelings, and our actions. So first, on the level of worldview, I think we need to learn and really to remember that we are part of this larger whole of life on earth, which is so easy for us to forget in our culture. Second, we need to let ourselves feel the emotional pain that this destruction and degradation of life on this planet is causing us personally and collectively, so that third, we can properly take it in and respond with collective action to the enormity of the situation we find ourselves in. So let me break this down a little bit more. First, on the level of worldview, the basic reorientation needed, I believe, is a movement away from what the eco-philosopher Joanna Macy calls our industrial growth society model. What I think 2 weeks ago I referred to from John Philip Newell's work, he might call the culture of empire. And an interesting third perspective on this is the Native American author and activist Sherry Mitchell, which she calls it the culture of colonization from her perspective. Of these 3 writers, Sherry Mitchell's words are perhaps the strongest. And so I want to share them because they're especially thought-provoking in regards to this question of what type of reorientation may be required of us. In her book, Sacred Instructions, she writes that while those who have benefited from the culture of colonization, while they might think that they're safe within this culture, which I feel sometimes, in reality, they are not. Because this culture will continue to consume everything in its path until everything has been devoured. Similar to the Lorax book, perhaps. The only way to stop this destruction, she writes, is to liberate ourselves from the colonial mindset and realign ourselves with the source of life, reconnecting with the earth and decolonizing our relationship with life. We need to regain our capacity for self-determination rather than being driven by this consumer culture, and self-sufficiency, so that we're no longer dependent on the trappings of the colonial economy and we are connected to the land and food sources, And this is something I spoke about as well three weeks ago. So this is a tall order, and I'm not sure I agree with every detail of her position, but I like this way of expressing the basic reorientation required for this work as decolonizing our relationship with life. I think it gets at the monumental task of it. I think it's a valuable lens to hold up, and it helps connect this work to some of our other projects as a faith community, such as anti-racism and social justice work initiatives. We humans are but a humble part of a greater whole that is life on this planet. I think that's the essential piece of the view that, and this life is sacred, and we need to be connected and hold that relationship in our minds and hearts as we move forward. Now let's move to the level of feelings. Here's how Joanna Macy and Molly Brown frame the problem on the emotional level in their book, Coming Back to Life. Quote, "The perils facing life on earth are so massive and unprecedented that they're hard even to take in. The very danger signals that should rivet our attention, summon up the blood, and bond us in collective action tend to have the opposite effect. They make us want to pull down the blinds and busy ourselves with other things. Our desire for distraction supports billion-dollar industries that tell us everything will be all right so long as we buy this car or that deodorant. We eat meat from factory-farmed animals and produce grown by agribusiness, ignoring the pesticides, hormones, and genetic alterations they contain. We buy clothes without noticing where they are made, preferring not to think of the sweatshops they may have come from." And I include myself in these categories here. This list goes on, but I'll stop there. She asks, has our society ceased to care what happens to life on earth? End quote. That's a tough statement to take in. And sometimes I feel exactly the way she's describing. I feel like in order to hold it together and just to survive as part of a family with two working parents with two young kids trying to make it all work, that I'm not able to care about these things all the time, you know? It's a hard thing to do. But I want to challenge myself and challenge us, because I agree with this. Joanna Macy's argument is that really the biggest impediment to saving our planet, the greatest danger, is the deadening of our hearts and minds to the enormity of the problem. You know, and we worry about going into despair, and we worry about, you know, what will people think? There's all sorts of things that come up, the fears. She argues that it's not that we've ceased caring about life on earth as a society, but rather it's our inability or refusal to experience the pain. That's the greatest danger. The biggest challenge, in a way, is to let it sink in that our way of modern life is causing losses of life so vast we can hardly comprehend them. A pain for the world, she writes. This is uncomfortable work, and I am grateful that you're willing to hold this for a moment with me. To be clear, the problem lies not with our pain for the world, but in our repression of the pain. She writes that our efforts to dodge or dull this pain surrender us to futility. So that from a systems perspective, we cut the feedback loop and block effective response. It's an interesting phrase there. This is to say that an effective response as living organisms require that we take in all the information given to us about the enormity of this situation, which includes our feeling perception, as well as our mental perception of it. And effective responses will require that. It's only by taking in the full scope of the problem that we can heal this crisis. Speaking for myself, the task of facing the emotional pain has often been too much for me. And indeed, one of the reasons I held up Celtic spirituality 2 weeks ago is that I feel personally it's through my connections with nature as sacred, what I call nature connection practices, and nature-based emotional healing work that I've been doing, that I'm starting to feel into this great pain that the larger system of Earth is experiencing, myself a part of that. And by doing that, I'm starting to face the situation a little more clearly with greater conviction. I don't have the answers. We're just working through this. This leads me back into what I feel needs to be done, though, on this third level of action. We have the scientific knowledge and the technical means to meet our needs without destroying our life support system, the Earth. We can satisfy our needs without jeopardizing the prospects of future generations. Frankly, it's the greed of our consumer economy, so deeply embedded within our institutions and corporations and culture, with the backing of state power and aggression at times when needed, and the support of some incredibly false narratives sometimes as well. So we really have our work cut out for us. But I share hope, and I share a position with Joanna Macy here that we need new and creative human responses or actions to emerge by collectively facing the emotional pain and learning to respond to the enormity of the situation through shifting our basic orientation, our perspective, and our values. Our church can, should, and is part of the solution to this, I think. We can come together, and we do come together as a collective. And I see our partnering with other organizations as a wonderful piece to this, let's say, solution. If you can imagine, as a church, we form one hand of a body, and then we partner with another organization working on like-minded goals, and partner with another as a foot or whatever it is, that together, syncing up in these ways, smaller units coming together, and then connecting in with other units and working on these larger goals. This is, I think, the way forward for us. And the good news is that we are doing this as a church community. We're already doing this. And I think we just need to do it more and take on the emotional, the wide-eyed and the open-hearted look at this situation. Author and environmentalist Paul Hawken provides a wonderful vision of what this kind of partnership can look like, which is where I'm borrowing this from in a way, on a planetary level. And he uses the metaphor of the human immune system. The immune system depends on its diversity he writes, to maintain resiliency, respond to surprises, learn from pathogens, and adapt to sudden changes. He writes, quote, "If the metaphor of an organism can be applied to humankind, we can imagine a collective movement that would protect, repair, and restore that organism's capacity to endure when threatened. Specifically, the shared activity of hundreds or thousands of nonprofit organizations can be seen as humanity's immune response to toxins like political corruption, economic disease, and ecological degradation," end quote. I think this is a beautiful image and a beautiful way forward. The Sufi teacher Llewellyn Vaughan Lee puts it this way, quote, "The world is not a problem to be solved. It is a living being to which we belong. The world is part of our own self, and we are a part of its suffering wholeness. Until we go to the root of our image of separateness, there can be no healing. And the deepest part of our separateness from creation lies in our forgetfulness of its sacred nature, which is also our own sacred nature," end quote. This is a beautiful vision of the spiritual work we need to do, I think, to make the shift on the levels of worldview, feelings, and actions, to remember that we're part of this larger whole of life on earth, to do the hard work of letting ourselves feel the pain of the destruction and degradation of this larger whole in safe ways, within community or with support as you need it, so that we can properly take in and respond collectively to the enormity of the situation that we find ourselves in. May this be so. Amen. Blessed be. We have now a ritual of healing and wholeness. And from this space we find ourselves in, just have a couple prompts, invitations to consider if you'd like, or not. Here's two possibilities. One, if you had no fear holding you back and were open to partnering with all the powers in the web of life available, what would you do in the service of the earth? Perhaps this coming year. Or if you prefer, what fear do you seek healing for in order to shift in a more life-sustaining direction?